Hello, and welcome to the Digital Workspace Works podcast. I'm Ryan Purvis, your host, supported by our producer Heather Bicknell. In this series, you'll hear stories and opinions from experts in the field, stories from the front lines, the problems they face and how they solved them, the areas they focused on from technology, people and processes, to the approaches they took that will help you to get to the grips with the digital workspace inner workings.
Yeah,
I'm sure yours is starting to be. Not yet.
not quite yet. Blissfully, besides looking at the email tally, but that is what it is.
Yeah, it's something that I always recognized when I did my trips to the US after working in Europe or Central Time Zone, how your day starts differently. Because when you're in the middle, like we are, you've got Asia that's ahead of you. So whatever they're dealing with, you get. And then when America comes online, you've got whatever America wants to know. So you're always squashed. But when I used to do the trip, and then we always used to work these long hours and get in early morning and leave late at night, or late-ish at least. And when I used to go to the US, I used to be surprised. Like guys at 5 o'clock would be knocking off, and I'd be like, "But where are you guys going?" Like, no, the day's done. I'm like, yeah, that's probably is because you are behind everyone. A lot gets done before you get there, and then there's no one really at the end of your day to keep you going longer because you're at the end of the day. So it was a much more relaxed lifestyle I found compared to being in the middle.
Interesting. That is an interesting observation. I would say I haven't always found that to be the case, but I'm sure it depends on the organizational culture and whatnot. I feel like Americans do, depending, but do work really long hours.
So what I'm saying is your end of the day is not driven by someone else. It's driven
That's
by
true.
you working late. So
Yeah.
so my working late usually in London would have been, or even when I'm in South Africa, is because someone in the US wants to talk about something, and the only time they get to find something in my diary would be in the evening. Whereas when I'm in the US, there's no one after me unless I was up at midnight. Then Asia would get me. But you do have a natural break.
Yeah, you don't have as many late meetings unless it's really late and you're trying to meet with Australia or Asia Pacific, which I've done a few times too. So yeah, time zones are tough to bridge. I think that relates to our topic today. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask if you have a Mac update, if anything new is there now that you've had it for longer.
Yeah, so I'll probably start with my Windows update. So I tried to reinstall my Windows device because I thought I'll just, at least now that I've got another machine, I'll try to clean it up. And it crashed the whole way through. In the end, I had to get a new image down and reinstall it from a USB stick. And that seems to have made the difference. So I might have had a very sick puppy, which is probably why I had so many issues. But on the Mac front, I'm just loving it. It just makes my life easy. And we had a power failure last night, and I plugged in all my devices to my Mac, and my Mac charged all my other devices. So it just works everywhere. The only thing that I haven't found yet, which I need to find a solution for, is Microsoft Project, because there isn't an app for that. Well, there's not a Microsoft app for that, so I need to find a third party. But other than that, I am finding little things that I've gotten used to that I'm going to have to change. So I've got this ergonomic trackball that doesn't work so well with swiping left and right with the gestures. And I kind of like the gestures because sometimes what I do now is I just go work downstairs on my dining room table and with just the Mac. And you get used to the gestures of switching between full screens. But you can't do that with these Windows-based devices, the keyboard and the mouse. So I'm going to have to invest. So I'm definitely in the ecosystem now. It's pulling me into buying all the gadgets. But I love it. It works, makes my life easier, which is what these things should do.
Absolutely. And did you get, I can't remember, did you get just the regular gray or did you go with one of the color options?
I went with space gray, but I bought my wife the rose colored one, which I must admit I've got a bit of envy on because it does just look cool.
Yeah.
It's different. But see, the space gray goes with my iPad because my iPad's space gray. So they all, I didn't like the silver. I looked at the silver for a long time. I was like, I really don't like the silver. So yeah.
Good stuff. Glad that's going well. I'm jealous still. Still kicking around with my old MacBook Air, but it's essentially I use it for like a tablet type stuff, so it's perfectly fine.
Well, that's what someone else said to me. He said, he really uses his Mac for browsing the web because it's great for that. I was like, yeah, I get that. But, I listened to another podcast called The Automators, and a lot of the stuff they do automation wise is based on having a Mac device. So using stuff like Drafts and Hazel and that. So now I've been able to play with those things, which I've never played with before. And that's also making my life a lot easier. So it's like moving files from one place to another place, that's like an automatic rule now. And Drafts, which I use on my iPad, now I'm using on my Mac as well. That's great because that's quick and easy to just take notes on something. So it's those little things that have probably held me back for a while. It probably costs you 5 minutes, every hour. But I'm seeing that productivity gain now because I don't have to now figure out a way to get my device from my mobile device to put the stuff into my Windows device. It's now just all synchronized. And the synchronization just works. I haven't had one problem yet, touch wood. So yeah, so one day when you upgrade, you'll see what I mean.
Yeah, one day. Well, I guess that smoothness of experience and reliance of technology relates to the mini series sort of that we wanted to kick off today on digital nomads. So yeah, really excited to dig into this topic more. And I think it's definitely something that, I think coming out of, all of the remote working around the pandemic, people are kind of realizing that in a lot of cases, there are lifestyle changes they can make, and one of them is potentially becoming a digital nomad.
Yeah, exactly. And we're seeing it we saw it a bit in the UK, and we're seeing it here as well. People are no longer, so I'll give a maybe context of this. So in the UK, London is seen as the center of most things. Now you do have Liverpool, Manchester, which are also major cities, and that's where a lot of businesses are putting their offices now into Manchester and Liverpool. But what you're seeing is that if you wanted to do business or have a good salary, you're going to be London based because you get like a 20% bump on your numbers. And typically most the banks and all that are situated in various parts of the square mile. Now, in the same token, South Africa, Johannesburg is where most of that happens. Then Sandton is the area that where most of the businesses are, most of the head offices. But there's pockets like everywhere else in the world. There's always pockets of business centers. The interesting thing about that is that people typically, prior to the pandemic, were buying houses to be as close as they could be to where their jobs were. So they were buying obviously in Sandton or nearby, and in London you'd be inside the zones within the M25 to be close to work, to commute. Because the further out you go, obviously the longer it takes. And there's always been this sort of ratio where the train ticket that you're paying for versus the mortgage you're paying or the rent you're paying kind of works. If you add them together, it always kind of is the same number. So the further out you go, it might cost you less to live, but it costs you more to travel, and vice versa. What we're seeing now is people that were trying to be close to work, or those CBDs, central business districts, are now saying, well, I don't have to be in the office every day, so I'm going to buy the house that I want to have for a lifestyle, and I'll commute for work when I have to, the 1 or 2 days a week, or even 3 days a week. So now instead of buying houses in Joburg, people are buying houses at the coast. So Durban, Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Mossel Bay, all these wonderful places, all these pretty places, because they're all pretty. They got beautiful landscapes and nature and all that sort of stuff. And because of fiber, they're basing themselves wherever they need to be, and they're commuting up or planning to commute up as and when they require. And a lot of the businesses are shutting down offices that they had, and they're consolidating them into bigger hubs. And I'm saying a lot, there's a few that I've chatted to. And what I saw in the UK was something similar, where when the first lockdown kicked in, there was a surge, and I think it happened in New York as well. There was a surge of people buying houses or moving out of the cities into the suburbs. So they had space and they felt more secure, because they were obviously going to be socially distancing naturally, because they were big houses that were separated from other houses. So that kind of ties into this concept, of the digital nomad, which is you don't have to now be beholden to this anchor that is the office block that you for the business you're working. You can have a more flexible lifestyle.
Yeah, I think there are kind of many flavors of digital nomad. I think the one sort of the most popular, Instagram worthy version is the millennial who's globetrotting, which is the backpack and a MacBook, and visiting all these tropical locations and working from the beach. But I think the phenomenon you're describing is related to this. I think, why not lower your cost of living live in a bigger place or, in a more desirable location and then suffer, a longer commute when you have to go, if you have to go, when and if you have to go back a few days a week. I mean, that's sort of the whole, one of the benefits of the hybrid model. Now, I guess where my fear comes in, if I were one of those folks, is just, do I trust my company to kind of keep that model? Or, if I change my job, well, then you have to kind of take that as a consideration when you're looking for new employment, that you need that kind of flexibility. But, so there are drawbacks and positives to
Yeah,
everything.
and I'll be honest. I mean, I've been very fortunate with my current role that we during the pandemic basically gave up our office, and when we came out to South Africa, the UK was in a worse state than South Africa was and probably still is. So I was, pretty lucky that, or fortunate, whatever you want to phrase it, that there was an acceptance that didn't matter whether I was in the UK or here, I would still only be seeing people remotely. Now that things are starting to open up, it maybe creates a bit more pressure for us to be back in the UK, not necessarily for any other need than to do face-to-face workshops every so often. But if we didn't have a quarantine, I'd probably be able to just fly back, do the week in Manchester where we want to meet, and fly back to Joburg, because that's no different almost in a sense to me traveling to Horsham to Manchester and back. It'd be the same thing because my base operations is Horsham, not Manchester. But what I have seen, prior to the pandemic and probably still going on, is a lot of those people that live the nomadic lifestyle or digital nomads are independent contributors. So they are software developers that work on contract. One of the women I went to school with, or university with at least, she writes on a Medium sort of series, and she manages her work while she travels. Another friend of ours, she during the lockdown went to spend 3 months in Italy, and now she's spending 3 months in Cape Town. Rented out the house that she lives in, and she's decided to work remotely. Where it gets tricky though is when you're employed in a job, how do you get taxed? Whereas when you're independent consultant, you get paid and you're basically invoicing for a service. So you can play that however you want, really, because you can invoice from whichever country you're in, or to you can move around, I suppose, to avoid paying tax or paying a small amount. All depends on how you set things up. Not the right tax show.
Yeah, no, there's a lot of legal stuff we probably won't get into with much depth, but when I was researching this topic, those sort of considerations came up a lot. I mean, even things, besides just legal, like safety or wellness things like, health insurance, different, insurances to protect yourself, visas, the legality of, where your money's flowing, taxes, all of that can be very complex. And often people are operating in these gray areas where, they're on travel visas but they're earning income, which they're not, is technically illegal, at least in some countries in the, from the US, that would not be technically legal, but it kind of gets, not enforced too heavily a lot of the time, which allows people to keep doing it. But there are countries now that are starting to create programs to actually encourage digital nomads to create this like more formal legal pipeline. Like Estonia has a digital nomad visa program. They're kicking off, and there are a few other countries that are doing that to try to make it easier and encourage people to come live and travel in the country.
Yeah, I'll be honest. I mean, for me, these are the inter-country thing is the complicated version, but I even go down to the simpler version of, in the business that you're working in, either you're working as I say, independent contributor, or you're employed. If you choose to work in a coffee shop today, and the technology provides you the capability to do that, let's say you have to write a document, or you're meeting with some people and you want to brainstorm in the coffee shop, and you may have to do some calls there. That's still a nomadic lifestyle, because you're not necessarily commuting into an office every day. You just go to meet at the local coffee shop with 3 people you need to meet with, or you want to work there because it's more comfortable than your home office, or even your office that you have at the business. That's still a nomadic way of working, and it's a simple way of doing it, because there are days where you just to walk into your office, your study every day, and if you're lucky to have one, you might say, I actually feel like going to that coffee shop where I can get a cappuccino with cream. I can sit there, I can think about what I got to do, I can write some stuff, or whatever it is, and then you can take calls. If you sit in the right position where it's not noisy, you could probably take calls the whole day. And I used to do that at varsity. I used to go and study in coffee shops, and not the library, and people used to say I was mad, but I found the library was too quiet, whereas the noisy coffee shop was a great background noise for me to focus. And I think that's just, a little bit more personalized working environment as opposed to a mandated working environment.
And is varsity university?
Yes,
Okay.
sorry.
All the different terms. No. Yeah, I almost think we need a new term for that kind of digital nomad. There's an emerging slowmad trends, and slowmads are people who don't travel as quickly, essentially. So they'll spend sort of longer stays in each country instead of just a matter of weeks. But yeah, I like it, kind of a digital nomad light, or a much safer sort of option, but still getting a lot of the refreshing qualities, I think, of working from different places to still, of course, there's a lot to be said about, the excitement of traveling and doing all of that while you work, because a lot of people don't have time to do that otherwise. But there's, then you can't really do a whole lot of other things as well that would require you to have a home base. So
Yeah, there are definitely trade-offs, and for me, with this, prior to having a family and the rest of it, spending a week or 2 weeks somewhere, be it Kuwait or Dubai or Saudi or Cameroon or wherever these places were, it wasn't such a big deal to be out of my home base, because one, I was working on something. Two, you're exploring a new place and you're seeing their culture, which I always found fascinating. But also, three, you don't get those opportunities always, because if you're paying for it, then you've got to always, balance where you want to go versus what you can afford. Whereas when you're on the company tab, it's a little bit easier to go and spend 5 days in a hotel and see customers every day and all that kind of stuff. With the family, a lot more difficult, clearly. We were talking about yesterday at breakfast how we've got a friend who's going to Mozambique for 2 days. And she's got a that just thinks of it as a party, going there to the beach, you're going to go work during the day and you go to the beach at night. And she's like, no, I'm leaving my kids at home. I don't want to leave my kid at home. I want to stay at home and work, be with my family. So two different mindsets there. And I think that's a part of it too, is what do you want to get out of, what's your purpose and what's your results from that purpose?
So with going from the UK to South Africa and the different sort of work arrangements you've had this year, would you consider yourself a digital nomad?
Yeah, I think I've always been a bit of a nomad in that sense. So, I go back to varsity, or even not necessarily high school, but, I used to work while I was studying. So I'd have to be I'd be at university going to lectures, and then in the gaps, I'd be doing work. And I think the biggest stress then, and still the biggest stress now, is connectivity. Can I connect in to do what I need to do when I need to do it? A second factor is quietness, if you're going to do calls and stuff like that. Usually get away with that sort of stuff. But as my career has progressed, I've always had this sort of flexible working, integrated working, whatever you want to use as a phrase, which has meant that I've had to be comfortable, which I've always been comfortable being, to work wherever I am. In fact, it's probably more of a challenge to not be working, because you get very used to anywhere you go, just taking your laptop with and, I'll just join a call quickly because I've got the time. How can I help you guys? That kind of thing, which is not always conducive because you don't take a break. But as we've gone from career to career, where I've struggled personally is, going into these corporates where you've got to be in the office 5 days a week, 9 to 5, whatever the shift work is. And, even the concept of going down to the coffee shop with a notepad to make notes, some people look at you strangely, like you should be at your desk all day. That's the mentality I've always struggled with. Whereas I always feel like the results and the output should matter more than the time at a desk. So yeah, so to answer your question, doing this one in South Africa has been definitely a nomadic experience, because I've done it with the family, so I haven't had to worry about getting back to the UK. They've been with me. We've done trips down to Cape Town, to Durban, where I've taken my laptop with me most times. And we could quite easily just sat there and I could have carried on working, because all I really need is a laptop and a headset to get my job done. So, with the kids and the wife, if I'm working, they just need to be entertained. And if we're going to do, if we're doing a resort or something like that, that's pretty easy to do because it's a kids club or whatever it is. And then you have this benefit of you work the whole day. And we've done it in a few countries. I mean, we did it in Croatia a couple of years ago, where I would work in the mornings. My wife would take my son out. They'd go walk on the beach and do all that stuff in the morning while I do my calls and whatever it is. I'd work 3-4 hours. Then we'd go and do some touring. I might do some work in the evening, like sort of 5 to 6, just catch up on some stuff. Then we'd go out for dinner somewhere, then put the kids to bed. And then if there was still a need for me to do something, I'd work that night. And I'd still put in a full day. But now I've done that in a new place where I've never been before. We've done some touring, so I've explored some stuff. So you get that benefit of working, but you also get the benefit of exploring. So in the end, you don't feel, I found at least, you don't feel it's so monotonous. You're stimulated the whole way through. And then when you go to bed, you're exhausted because you've done so much in a day.
Yeah, I think that's it can be a good model if your job situation allows it. I think the one challenge that comes with sort of being working for an employer is that you still need to operate on their time zone, at least, plus or minus a little bit. So, people were saying that's why I think a lot of digital nomads tend to be freelancers, entrepreneurs, people who can, set their own time, because it's all well and good to be on the other side of the world. But if, the nighttime time where you'd be having the most fun there is the time where you need to be working because of the time zone that your company's in, it kind of is a bit of a drag.
Yeah, and I had that. I mean, we did a trip to LA 2014. Yeah, 2014. And we were rolling out a big project at the same time. And because of the time zone difference, I think it was 9 hours or 8 hours difference, there was no way that I could work with the UK. And I think we had guys in Singapore working, so it was even worse. So what would happen is I would basically check my mail in the morning in LA, maybe spend an hour or two going through that and sort of kicking off more work or replying to work, and then go out the whole day, come back at the end of the evening, check what's happened, check again in case there was anything that happened, go to sleep, wake up and get a reply to all the emails from the day before. So you had this constant, like, you're completely disconnected, which in some senses was really nice because you weren't involved in the operational throes of everything. And you could actually just take a sort of a situational look at it and go, okay, this is what we discussed, this is where we are now, here's what I suggest you do. And then they would come online while you're sleeping, pick up what you're doing, and then carry on. And there was no major emergencies, so there wasn't any 3 o'clock in the morning phone calls, but it kind of did work. And we were away for a week, so it didn't need to be, necessarily, there was too many urgent things, but it at least kept the bus rolling. The boulder rolling down the hill, not the bus rolling. It's a bad analogy, because I could at least keep providing input, so there wasn't a blocker, which is often the problem with some of these roles that I'm involved in, is that you hold on to, you have to make a decision for someone to carry on working, even though they are empowered. Sometimes they still want you to make that decision. So yeah, it's a balancing act, that's for sure.
Yeah. But you still had that flexibility then to decide, sort of when you would work and when that would work best. But I guess, depending on what industry you're working in, how senior you are, how strict your employer is with certain things, you might not get that all the time.
Well, I'd argue we all have a choice to when we work. I mean, yes, you sign a contract and the contract stipulates working hours, but I think the reality is if you actually followed your contract to the letter, you probably work a lot less time than you do. I think, bad example is probably the 9 to 5 with 1 hour lunch break. Now that you're at home, you're not commuting, so you might start at 7, and you might, because you're in the throes of it, you might work till 7 that night because you're getting stuff done, and you might skip lunch because you don't have the time. If you had to follow the contract, you probably wouldn't do as much. Whereas if you're treated like an adult, and you've agreed that you'll deliver something, then your clarity around what you have to deliver and how you do it is up to you. That puts you in a good position. Now, if you manage a team, unfortunately, that means you've got to be available to them when they need you, which I've always been, regardless of where I am or what we're doing, which is probably bad too. But, if my team sends me a message on Teams, I'll see the indication and I'll reply to it because they're working, and I don't want them to be blocked because I didn't answer their quick question. And if I can't take a call, I don't take a call. I've had to set boundaries up, to be honest. If I'm doing bath time with the kids, then I'll say I'm doing bath time with the kids. I'll talk to you in 2 hours, and that's what it is. But at least they know, as opposed to having to wait a whole cycle, which is the next day. So very much about momentum.
Yeah.
Super. Thanks, Heather.
All right.
Speak
Talk
to
to
you
you
soon.
later. Okay.
Cheers,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Heather Bicknell is our producer and editor. Thank you, Heather, for your hard work on this episode. Please subscribe to the series and rate us on iTunes or the Google Play Store. Follow us on Twitter at the DWW Podcast. The show notes and transcripts will be available on the website www.digitalworkspace.works. Please also visit our website www.digitalworkspace.works and subscribe to our newsletter. And lastly, if you found this episode useful, please share with your friends or colleagues.